The skies over Africa have been battlegrounds for over 60 years, but most of the world never knew. Warplanes clashed, cities burned, and entire air forces were built and destroyed, all while the world looked away. These are the wars they never taught you about. This is Africa's forgotten air. In 1960, 17 African nations took their place at the United Nations, each one stepping out from under the shadow of empire. Flags changed, leaders rose, and the old colonial borders began to fray. The world's largest wave of independence was underway, and with it came a scramble for power that echoed far beyond dusty parliaments and city squares. As European armies withdrew, they left behind more than empty barracks. They left a vacuum. One that rival factions, foreign interests, and ambitious neighbors rushed to fill. The skies, once guarded by colonial patrols, became open ground for new battles. Across the continent, nationalist movements surged. In the streets of Accra, Conakry, and Lagos, crowds demanded self-rule. In the forests and savannas, insurgents picked up arms, determined to force the issue where negotiations failed. The world's superpowers, eager to tip the balance, sent advisors, weapons, and promises. The Cold War's shadow stretched across the Sahara and into the heart of the Congo, turning local struggles into global contests. Yet not every European power let go. Portugal, isolated and defiant, refused to abandon its African colonies, while France and Belgium negotiated their exits. Lisbon dug in, convinced it could hold Angola, Mozambique, and Guinea-Bissau by force. As independence swept the continent, Portugal's refusal to decolonize set the stage for a series of long, grinding wars. In these territories, the fight for control would not be won on the ground alone. With roads impassable and distances vast, whoever controlled the air would control the future. The collapse of empire did not bring peace. It opened the skies to a new kind of conflict, one that would shape Africa's destiny, even as the world looked away. Africa's wars were shaped not just by men and machines, but by the land itself. On a continent where roads vanish into bush and rivers cut through hundreds of miles of wilderness, the ground is an enemy all its own. In the 1960s, less than 15 kilometers of railway ran for every 1,000 square kilometers of African land, 1/10 the density of Europe. Most roads, when they existed at all, turned to mud in the rainy season or disappeared into desert. For armies, this meant slow convoys, stranded columns, and supply chains stretched to the breaking point. But for those with aircraft, the map looked different. A single transport plane could leap over a jungle and desert in hours, dropping food, ammunition, or paratroopers where no truck could ever reach. Runways, sometimes nothing more than a strip of flattened dirt, became lifelines. Control of a single airfield could decide whether a town starved or survived. Superpowers understood this. American and Soviet intelligence reports from the early Cold War are filled with talk of jumping off airstrips and emergency landing rights. The CIA tracked every new runway in Guinea, Angola, or Chad, knowing that a few hundred meters of tarmac could tip the balance of a war. Soviet advisors too hunted for airfields to base their MiGs and Antonovs, offering military aid in exchange for basing rights. The scramble for African skies was a scramble for logistics, for the power to move men and machines where the ground would not allow. In this world, tanks and artillery mattered less than the ability to reach the battlefield at all. Air power was not just an advantage, it was a necessity, a way to overcome the tyranny of distance and the limits imposed by the land. As the wars escalated, so did the race for airfields, fuel, and the cargo planes that could decide the fate of entire regions. Portugal's air war in Africa was built on speed, improvisation, and relentless pressure. The Portuguese Air Force put its faith in light aircraft, T-6 Harvards, Dornier Do 27s, and by the 1970s, the Fiat G91 jet, flying from rough dirt strips hacked out of jungle and bush. Each day, pilots launched an average of 1.8 sorties per aircraft, dropping rockets and bombs on guerrilla positions, then landing to reload and do it again. The doctrine was simple: strike quickly, keep insurgents off balance, and use the sky to cover for thin ground forces and impassable roads. But every flight took a toll. Engines overheated in the African heat. Maintenance lagged behind the breakneck pace. By 1973, the cost of keeping planes in the air had more than doubled since the start of the wars, fueling anger back in Lisbon as the conflict dragged on. In Guinea-Bissau, the illusion of air superiority shattered on March 25, 1973. That morning, a Fiat G91 on a low-level attack run was hit by a Soviet-supplied SA-7 Grail missile, one of the first man-portable air defenses seen in Africa. The pilot ejected and survived, but the message was clear: the old tactics no longer worked. Jet operations in the region were suspended for months. Pilots were ordered to fly higher, out of reach, but at the cost of accuracy. The insurgents had found a way to strike back, and suddenly, the hunter was just as vulnerable as the hunted. Within a year, the Portuguese Air Force had lost 87 aircraft across 3 colonies. An anonymous flight log entry from late 1973 reads simply: engine out, strip abandoned, crew safe, aircraft lost. Each loss echoed back home, fueling protests and parliamentary debates. The war's cost, measured in machines, money, and morale, had spiraled out of control. The era of easy air dominance was over, replaced by a new reality where even the sky offered no safe haven. Count Carl Gustaf von Rosen arrived in Biafra with a plan that defied military logic and the odds. Where others saw defeat, he saw opportunity in the smallest of aircraft, the Malmo MFI-9 Minimaster, a civilian trainer barely larger than a family car. Von Rosen and his team stripped the planes down, reinforced their frames, and fitted each with 2 68mm rocket pods. Painted in bright colors and nicknamed the Biafran Babies, these 3 aircraft became the heart of Biafra's improvised air arm. On May 22, 1969, the Biafran Babies launched their most audacious attack. Flying low over the treetops, they slipped past Nigerian radar and struck Port Harcourt's oil terminal, damaging fuel tanks and hitting a MiG-19 on the ground. The raid, carried out in superiority.The, sent shockwaves through Nigerian command. Over the course of the war, the Biafran Babies flew 47 sorties, each mission a gamble against modern jet fighters and anti-aircraft fire. The pilots, a mix of Swedish volunteers and Biafran loyalists, relied on speed, surprise, and the willingness to risk everything for a cause the world had already written off. But ingenuity could only delay the inevitable. Nigerian MiG-19s, backed by Soviet advisors, tightened the blockade from the air and sea. Relief flights dwindled. By late 1969, Biafra's airfields were battered and supplies nearly gone. The blockade's grip turned catastrophic. Famine swept across Biafra, claiming an estimated 500,000 lives. The air war, once a symbol of defiance, became a memory as starvation and disease overwhelmed the enclave. Von Rosen's Biafran Babies proved that courage and creativity could wound a giant, but not save a nation cut off from the world. The real legacy was not a string of victories, but a lesson in the limits of improvisation when facing overwhelming force. An unsigned operation order, stamped with the seal of the French Ministry of Defense, authorized the deployment of Mirage F-1 fighters to Chad in the early 1980s. The mission was clear, but never public. Halt Libyan convoys moving south across the desert. Officially, France denied direct involvement, but the flight logs tell a different story. Each week, Mirage pilots intercepted and destroyed an average of 18 Libyan supply trucks, reducing Gaddafi's ability to reinforce his proxies in the Tibesti and Borku regions. French jets flew from N'Djamena, refueled by C-135 tankers, and struck targets hundreds of kilometers from the nearest paved road, operating in near silence. French command relied on a deniable warfare model. No insignia, no press briefings, just a steady attrition of enemy logistics. The pattern followed the interests of Paris, to protect oil concessions, to contain Libyan influence, and to keep the war's true scale hidden from public view. In the shadows, air power became the ultimate leverage, shaping a conflict most of the world never knew existed. A single cable from Moscow changed the course of the Ogaden War. The Soviets, once Somalia's patrons, now threw their weight behind Ethiopia. Within weeks, Il-76 transports began touching down at Addis Ababa, offloading crates marked with Cyrillic stencils. Inside were 24 MiG-21 fighters, fresh from Soviet assembly lines. Cuban pilots and ground crews followed, flown in by a surge of Antonov transports. The airfields filled with unfamiliar faces and new orders. Ethiopian officers reeling from months of defeat watched as their battered air force was rebuilt almost overnight. By January 1978, the counteroffensive began. Cuban-piloted MiGs swept the skies, hunting Somali jets and pounding armored columns retreating across open desert. Radar screens flickered with new call signs. Somali pilots, outnumbered and outgunned, abandoned forward airstrips and fell back toward Mogadishu. In less than 3 months, the balance of power reversed. By March, Somali troops withdrew in disarray, leaving behind wrecked tanks and burned-out convoys. The war's outcome had been decided not in the trenches, but in the cargo holds of Soviet aircraft and the order telegraphed from Moscow. In the Horn of Africa, the skies belonged to whoever could command the world's superpower airlift. Today, the scars of these air wars still shape borders, regimes, and destinies. Yet most history books remain silent, as new conflicts flare and foreign powers return to Africa's skies. Forgetting these brutal lessons is a choice. Memory is the only defense against repeating what the world refused to see.